Hi there. So this is just a really basic Salsa Verde recipe using tomatillos, chilies, garlic, onion, salt, and maybe honey. So basically it's a roasted tomatillo and pepper Salsa Verde. So we're going to broil the tomatillos, the onion, and the chilies, and then blend them together to make the salsa. This is about 3.5 pounds of washed tomatillos, and that's about 10 to 12 ounces of red ripe New Mexico or Hatch or Anaheim style chilies. So these are fairly mild, low heat chilies, because the point is to get up to the heat level of the that you want or desire in your salsa. You're actually adding a lot of pepper flavor because the peppers are fairly mild, and I think it adds like an interesting color as well. But these have to be dead ripe without any green on them at all, because then they tend to impart much more red color to what would otherwise be like sort of a pale green salsa. Okay, and then the honey will add to taste maybe at the end. It kind of depends on how. Sometimes I add it and sometimes I don't. And I'm actually going to be making double this recipe. This makes about 3 to 4 pints of salsa canned, but I'm going to be doubling this to make around 7 pints just to fill my canner. But you can make, it's more the proportions. So this is about 3.5. This is 1 big onion, but you could use 2 like regular size onions, and then there's just 1 head of garlic. We're going to use this entire thing. Okay, so first thing to do is to broil the peppers. Okay, so we've roasted them on one side, and we can just flip them over, and I'm not going to use a spoon. What am I doing? We can just flip them over and roast the other sides. Alright? The second side goes pretty quick. Broily, broily. Okay, so the peppers are roasted, and so what we're going to do is put them in a paper bag to let them sweat so that we can peel them. So those can just sit for a while in the bag. Okay, so we've broiled the peppers and they're cooling, and now you just slice your onion into big, thick rounds, and then we're going to broil the onion to caramelize the edges. Okay, so here's the roasted onions, and I just did one side. We can just, because with a pan like this, they kind of caramelize on the bottom anyway. So we can set those sides aside to cool a little bit, and now we can start. Oh, dropped the tomatillo. We can just get the tomatillos on the pan to roast, and it's nice to use like a pan with a lip, because as these start to roast, they will release a lot of liquid. So you want something that'll hold that liquid in so it doesn't spill all over the oven. If you're doing this on the grill, then you can do that too. Okay, so we got them all laid out there, and we'll just broil them until they're blistered and blackened on the top. and then we'll flip them over. Okay, so there they are done on one side. You can see a lot of them are nicely browned and blistered, and when they're cooked, you know, tomatillos change from sort of this emerald green to kind of an olive green color. So I'm going to flip over, not all of these, but the biggest ones to try and get them on the other side, and then they'll be done, ready to blend. Okay, so while your tomatillos are broiling, the peppers have had some time in the bag to sweat, and they should be pretty easy to peel now. And you don't have to get every last bit of skin off of them, but I like to get some of it. And the reason I like to use these Hatch style, Anaheim style chilies for this salsa is because they're really rather mild. And so in order to add significant amounts of heat to the salsa, you have to add a bunch of these, and so you get a ton of roasted pepper flavor. Whereas if you're using a hotter pepper, you know, very quickly you're going to make the salsa too hot for most people, you know, before you start to taste any real pepper flavor. So these are really great. And then once you've got enough of these peppers to get some good pepper flavor. Now, as far as the seeds go, I don't like to get all the seeds out because, you know, most of the heat is in the placenta surrounding the seed, or that the seeds are attached to. But I do, some of these are really seedy, and the seeds are kind of obtrusive in the salsa. So but that's up to you, to seed or not to seed. The more you seed them, the less heat you're adding. So, yeah, make up your own mind on that. Okay, so we have most of our ingredients. Here are the roasted tomatillos. Here's the roasted onion, roasted peppers, and our garlic. So I'm just gonna coarsely chop the onion and the pepper. Okay, and I will run the garlic through a garlic press. Doesn't have to be a really fine tooth press. But let's just build this salsa. So these guys, get a spoon here. Still pretty hot. And our onion. Whoop. Pepper. So this batch size, sorry, wash my hands real quick. This batch size is more or less gauged for my blender here, but proportionally you can make this larger or smaller depending on how much salsa you want to make. I'm making kind of a double batch right now because I want to just fill the canner. So I'm going to do 2 blender loads basically. Now other things you can add, darn it, other things you can add are, if you're going to just make a small batch and are going to use it really quickly, really fresh, it's worth putting in cilantro. I feel like cilantro is not worth doing in a salsa you're canning. I just don't feel like it adds any flavor once you've, you know, processed the salsa and canned it. But I do think it's worth adding fresh salsa if you're blending it up fresh, and I would add it right now while we're blending. And then the only other thing is some salt, and I'm just gonna add, you know, like half a tablespoon or whatever. I mean, I didn't measure it right now, and then we'll give it a taste later. And then once we have this blended up, we'll see if it needs any honey. I like a little bit of sweetness, but a lot of times, depending on how ripe some of your tomatillos are, you don't need to add it. So then you just puree the stuff. Lovely. It's got a nice heat. I'm pretty happy with it. And one thing I like is, you know, this is Salsa Verde, but you can see that it's really more like a brown color. Now, just pause a moment, sweetie. So one thing with this recipe is kind of how ripe the chilies you use are, and how many you use kind of determines the color of the salsa. So you can see this batch that I made had a little bit more ripe chilies in it, and so it imparted like a little more red color to the salsa. And then these two batches, this batch I'm making right now and this batch, look pretty close, although I think they're a little better. I like that brownness from the red of the chilies. It's kind of characteristic of this particular recipe. Okay, so we blended the salsa, and now it's just on a pot on the stove to sort of warm up and finish cooking off the ingredients. I kind of just do this for, you know, maybe 5 minutes once it starts bubbling. And then you spoon it into the jars and can it. Tomatillos, I think I read the National Institute of Health did a bunch of tests on the acidity of tomatillos for canning. And as long as whatever recipe you're canning them in contains 50% or greater amount of tomatillos, then you can just use water bath canning, because the acidity is by all means, you know, much low enough to prevent, you know, botulism or whatever. So it's perfectly safe to water bath can this recipe, which has got to be like 90% tomatillos. And in this case, I did add a little bit of honey, which I did not film, but probably this is a double batch also, by the way. This quantity you're looking at is twice the amount that you saw me processing. But so I put in about a tablespoon of honey for this entire double batch, so call it a half tablespoon. But like, that's kind of to taste, and it sort of depends on how sweet your tomatillos are, you know. So a lot of times you can just get by without adding any sweetener at all. I like a little bit of a sweetness to my tomatillo salsa, and in this case this was a little bit sour, so I added just a little bit of honey. But that's also a personal preference kind of a thing. And also in terms of heat, this is a pretty mild salsa, because I like to share it with, you know, the folks around here, and people don't have very high, you know, spiciness preference in this area, versus like Colorado where I grew up. So if you want to increase the heat be a little bit more, you can just keep adding like the chili peppers, but that adds it very, very slowly because they're not very hot. You can just throw a couple of jalapenos or a serrano in here, and that would amp it up a lot faster. Or if you're one of those super hot types, you know, you just throw in a habanero or something. But yeah, I really love the pepper flavor that you get by using, you know, the red, you know, Anaheim type chilies, New Mexico type chilies. So and it makes it more of like a chili or salsa moreno or whatever instead of salsa verde. But yeah. Okay, so we're just gonna can this up. You know, there's tons of videos on canning salsa, so I don't need to show you that. But thank you very much for watching.